Hello and welcome to a stormy episode of the Green Canary. Yes, this week we are again talking about the wild weather and its links to climate change. We're also going to be talking about how we could much better spend the vast sums of money that go towards fossil fuel subsidies. Now, we've also got a great interview with some Tassie enviro scientists who've sort of become entrepreneurs and they're making electric vehicles affordable. Hooray for that. We are also going to wade into an age-old debate about whether fish feel pain. Well, do they? Well, you'll have to stick around till the end of the episode to find out. And that is our clickbait for the week.
Oh, God.
Started early this week, Elfie.
How did you manage that even?
I don't even know. But look, there's a whole lot more on the podcast. I'm Ant Sharwood, and that person butting in as usual and feeling pain. I know Elfie feels pain when I make terrible segues or puns, but that is Elfie Scott. And Elfie, how are you? And geez, have you dried out at all with all this Sydney rain?
Oh, God, you better bet I have not. My apartment is looking moldier than ever. And that is just the curse of where I live in Sydney. It's fine. We're getting through it. But we've broken some records this week, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. And we do bring this podcast to you from the land of the Eora Nation, or i.e. Sydney, or our part of Sydney. And we seem to bang on about the Sydney weather quite a lot, but it has been remarkable this year. We have exceeded our all time since records started being kept in 1858. So in 164 years, we have not had a wetter year. For those who absolutely love statistics, we've exceeded 2,200 millimeters. The old record was 2,190 odd.
There you go.
It's a lot. It's really a lot. There's even a chance this year that Sydney could break the record for the wettest year on record by any capital city. So we could have...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it could be a wetter year here than Darwin has ever had, which is just remarkable because although Darwin only sees rain half a year, that half a year is so wet that it dwarfs anything any other city in Australia has seen, perhaps until now. So look, we're going to move on to Hurricane Ian for our first story and talk about the climate effects of that. But before we do, I would like to comment that although we have seen back-to-back La Niñas, in fact, back-to-back, this is the third La Niña spring, into summer, it'll last probably. But there is no doubt that human-caused climate change is making the atmosphere more capable of maintaining more moisture in events like this and making such events wetter and much more likely. So it's a climate story, but for most of us, Elfie, living it day to day, it's a mold story. And unfortunately for a lot of people, it's a flood story as well. So we send best wishes to anyone who's sort of underwater.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? When we look at stories like Hurricane Ian, I'm not going to complain about the severity of a little bit of mold in my apartment because this is quite an impactful story, really. And I think that we have to talk about the climate impact on this particular storm. So at this point, the death toll of Hurricane Ian has risen to over 130 people. People in the past few days have started returning to inspect the damage after the Category 4 storm swept through Cuba, Florida, North Carolina, and Virginia. Florida was obviously the hardest hit. I think that we all saw those headlines and videos on social media and things like that emerging. It is the 23rd deadliest storm in US history, and it's left between $28 and $63 billion worth of damage. Although I actually did read that was even perhaps an underestimation because they are saying that it could go into the hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah, you don't really know what the damage bill is until months or even years later sometimes with these things. But I was actually looking at stats, Elfie, of Florida hurricanes, and it's the sixth strongest that they've experienced of the 38 major hurricanes that have been recorded since the 1850s. Which again seems to be when weather stats started getting good. I was just talking about Sydney's records starting in 1858. We'll have to find out what happened in weather technology in the 1850s that we started recording things. But look, so there have been 38 hurricanes that have struck Florida since the 1850s, but three of the top six have been in the last few years. So you know, that really brings us to the fact, doesn't it, that we know that hurricanes are getting stronger. Now, hurricanes are one of the most complicated meteorological phenomena. There are not necessarily more hurricanes. It's a really tricky one. But because we're always talking about frequency and severity with things like floods and bushfires, but hurricanes are such a fantastically complicated weather thing that it's unclear yet as to whether we are seeing more. But what's so clear is that when we get one, it's much more likely to be a Cat 4 or Cat 5, like Hurricane Ian was.
Yeah, absolutely. So there has been like more research, especially around like North Atlantic hurricanes, particularly. Apparently there's something specific about the way that you can measure the building impact and severity of those storms across the Atlantic that links them more strongly to climate change than other weather events. So I've read research that Katrina, Irma, Maria, Harvey, Dorian, and Florence, all hurricanes, which you've probably heard the names of, they together account for $500 billion in damage. And it has been said definitively that they were made more intense by climate change. And there are like these ways that scientists now can measure the rising temperature alongside the amount of water that storms hold as well, so that you can sort of inextricably measure the impact that climate change has on the severity of these storms. And I think that when we hear stories like this, it's just a reminder to say, you know, like climate change and burning fossil fuels, they're not just some like nebulous events, you know what I mean? They actually have like real, literal on the ground impacts. And this is what we're seeing already.
That's well said. And I just want to chuck one more at you on the hurricane thing before we move on. And that was Hurricane Fiona, which was in late September, and it preceded Ian only by a week or two. It struck eastern Canada, Elfie. It went up and took out places, I think around Nova Scotia, places like that, Prince Edward Island, the eastern Canadian provinces. Now, you are talking about areas that are further north than Hobart is south. So if it was the southern hemisphere, you would be talking about a hurricane that struck south of Tasmania. That is how powerful these storms are and how much kind of oomph, to use a non-technical word, that they have as
no, that's what scientists say. They rate them out of oomph.
Yeah, oomph, as they move up that coast. So look, there are different weather patterns over there. There are reasons why hurricanes have traditionally tracked further north there than they track south in Australia. Let's not get bogged down in really boring nerd meteorology. but suffice to say, they haven't seen one that strong that far north before. That also tells you something.
Yeah, totally. And now let's talk more about fossil fuels now that we've spoken about their impacts. It's a classic ant segue. So we are going to be talking about what fossil fuel subsidies can pay for in Australia according to the Climate Council. So the Climate Council, who we bring up so frequently, I'm so sorry, but we do love them. They have released a report recently about what could be done with the $11.6 billion in total across Australia's state and federal governments that are used for the fossil fuel subsidies, and you know what sort of infrastructure could actually be built with that amount of money. Kind of fun.
Yeah, it's I thought they just did some terrific work here. I mean, it absolutely just puts it into all sorts of perspective. Let's run through a couple of them. We could see 1.5 million low-income Australian households fitted with solar systems. That'd be a good thing.
Yeah.
We could see 130 batteries, the size of Victoria's big battery. I love the way it's called the big battery. Like, you know, and it's near Geelong, where they have that really great road along the ocean that's called the Great Ocean Road.
All of these names that were just created just before lunch, you know what I mean? Like they were just decided, like, everybody break, it's done.
Yeah, big battery, that'll do. Goodbye.
Yeah.
But getting the idea, we could have 72,000 EV charging sites. We're about to talk about EVs, and that'll be great. You know, which is one for every 12k of road in the country. We could replace diesel buses in our cities and have electric vehicles instead. The subsidies can go a long, long way if they were put elsewhere. This $11.6 billion, I'll say it again, that the state and Fed governments used to subsidize the fossil fuel industry. They could go a long way, couldn't they, Alfie?
Yes, 100%. And I think that it's really interesting that this report comes around the same time that there has been a lot of newspaper coverage about the way the federal government is currently sitting on $1.9 billion that was set aside by the Morrison government to subsidize fossil fuel developments. So that money was set aside without ever being formally committed. It was just sort of placed in a little piggy bank somewhere. And now we have this $1.9 billion that could ostensibly go towards fossil fuel developments, but could also be redirected towards more productive things. And that's what the environmental groups and also the Greens are calling for at the moment. They say that there's a very strong opportunity for this cash to be used by the Albanese government in the very shortly upcoming budget for actually productive and green things. So it will be interesting to see if that's what it goes towards.
I can sense a green aspect of the budget episode coming up here on the Green Canary. And I just want to say to the listeners, we're going to make that interesting because budget coverage, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know if we're going to have to wear yellow caps with twirly things on them. I don't know how we're going to make that interesting. But we are. So everyone out there, please don't go, I'm not listening to the budget coverage. Or maybe we'll hide it. Maybe we won't put the word budget in the headline.
Yeah, maybe we'll just replace it with another word.
Green, yellow hats with twirly things. That's what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Okay, all right. So look, this is a good provocative piece of work by the Climate Council, and Adam Bandt is just being Adam Bandt. That's what Adam Bandt does. He's saying to the government to axe these zombie fossil fuel subsidies. And boy, if there is a cartoonist out there who has not drawn zombie fossil fuel subsidies in a newspaper today, then what even are you doing for a living?
Maybe you can get onto that, Ant, in your spare time.
I can't draw, Elfie. I'm challenged when it comes to drawing. But if I was a cartoonist, I would be drawing a zombie fossil fuel subsidy in tomorrow's paper.
All right, well, we'll look forward to that. And in the meantime, let's talk about electric cars. We bloody love talking about electric cars here. We speak about them too much. But we are going to talk about something very interesting today, because that is an electric vehicle startup from Tasmania. It was started by 3 environmental scientists, and they have just received $10 million in investment from Boundless, which is a philanthropic foundation backed by Mike Cannon-Brookes. They're called the Good Car Company, and they were founded back in 2019. They have this intention of bringing down the cost of electric vehicles for Australians, thank Christ, because they're so expensive and it doesn't seem to be getting better anytime soon. And they have this particular sort of strategy as well to bring these big batch buys of secondhand electric vehicles from overseas, and especially make them accessible to low-income communities in Tasmania and Victoria. So interestingly, Ant, they say that they can make the price of electric vehicles with these secondhand vehicles sit at around $20,000, as opposed to, say, the $40,000 or $50,000 that people are currently paying. And yeah, I did an interview with one of the founders. You've listened to it actually already, haven't you, in advance to this? Sorry, Ant.
Yes, no, that's all right. We sometimes do these interviews in real time in the pod, and other times we chuck them in the system. And I think you spoke to Anthony. Oh, you tell me his surname. He's an Anthony like me, but it gets harder after that.
Yes.
But I believe you spoke to.
So it was Anthony Bros van Granau, I believe is how you pronounce it. God, Anthony, please don't come for me later. I really tried. And he is the co-founder and managing director of the Good Car Company. So I spoke to them about what they do and what this cash injection means for them, and about Australia's electric vehicle market in general. So let's just roll it. Let's listen to it.
Okay.
All right. So first off, I wanted to ask a little bit about the background of the Good Car Company and how you and your co-founders actually came to create it.
Well, it was the night after the election, the 2019 election, and we were sitting in a pub, commiserating over a pint of beer, thinking, what are we going to do? And we were looking at, in Tassie, there's the one sector where emissions are growing pretty steadily is transport. I was thinking we need to do something that's going to, address another term of climate failure. And so we were initially going to convert. My wife's got an old 1979 Toyota Hilux. I think, great, we'll rip the guts out of that, put an electric motor in there and do it that way and see if we can start rolling that out. But that was a lot of work. And so we had some friends who had an electric car that they told us about what was happening over in New Zealand, and they had like 14,000 EVs at that time, which is pretty phenomenal because, they're a tenth of the population and had 10 times more EVs. So they pretty much just imported all their EVs secondhand from Japan. We thought, wow, we should do that too.
Yeah, right. Okay, sure. And can you tell me a little bit about the secondhand market overseas and why it is so useful for us here?
Well, I mean, we don't have a secondhand market to speak of here in Australia. Electric vehicles, there's a few reasons why we really like the secondhand vehicles. One is that the upfront purchase price is one of the biggest barriers for people getting into electric cars. So, they're vastly cheaper, and the first couple of years of their use actually pays down a lot of their carbon debt, even from the manufacturing of batteries. Mm-hmm. So, they're getting closer to being much, much lower emissions. And yeah, there's prioritised supply in the countries that we're getting them from. So, whereas here we're struggling to get every single EV that we possibly can into the country from the OEMs, we can just kind of bypass that and just bring them in directly.
Yeah, right.
So we're able to bring in secondhand and new electric vehicles as well, which is pretty cool.
Wow, okay.
So it's about affordability and choice.
Sure. And I mean, coming from the perspective of a consumer, so I think that there's already a little bit of trepidation from Australians around electric vehicles, right? Like, I think that there is this sort of barrier to get over. But then to say that, you should be able to purchase secondhand electric vehicles, I think to my mind, that makes me worried because I don't know anything about electric vehicles to begin with. So what is the quality of a secondhand electric vehicle?
Well, firstly, I think one of the big things about de-risking it for people is just ensuring that there's all the... Well, firstly, before even de-risking it, people need to know the pros and the cons of EVs. So we spend a lot of time just providing simple, digestible information about what it's like to live with an electric car. As we go on and we've got more and more people who've gotten an electric car through us or just in general, we really ask and work with them to be ambassadors and really give a warts and all rundown on what it's like to live with an EV. I think that's really, really important because, well, firstly, none of us come from a business or sales or car industry background at all. We're all environmental scientists and have been working not for profits for all of our lives.
Got it.
And so the idea of trying to sell something to people just really doesn't sit well with any of us. And so we just give the information and let people make their own decisions on it. But I think we also have to counter a lot of the misinformation that's been out there for such a long time.
Yeah.
There's that part, and then the other part is just de-risking it for people, especially with the second-hand cars. So we do battery diagnostics on all the vehicles and really thorough inspections of quality for, mechanical and aesthetic. But the most important thing is the battery quality. And so we drill into, we can extract all sorts of data from it, look at individual cell health, look at how balanced the entire pack is. We can see its entire life history, how many charges, what kind of charges, how long those charges are for. And so from that, we can extrapolate that this is a battery that's been well looked after and should continue to give people, a reliable run once they've got it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Then we put on a battery warranty and give people the option to return the vehicle if they want, and a 12 months of unlimited roadside assist with NRMA that we've partnered up with, and lots of support, so ongoing support. People can just pick up the phone anytime they want to have a chat, which is cool.
Brilliant. Okay. Can I ask a really silly question? But I mean, It seems interesting to me that there's such a large secondhand market overseas, especially considering like electric vehicles aren't that old in general. So I wonder why people are starting to sell them on already in these markets.
Well, so Japan, for example, they've got a really bizarre taxation rule, which I think, they frame it as having vehicles that are new with low emissions. Doesn't really make sense for the electric cars, but the thing is that it just creates a lot of churn, and automobile manufacturing is a huge, like Toyota are massive in Japan, and massive world over. They have a lot of influence in being able to shape national policies, and so the thing over in Japan with their taxation system is that every year that you own a vehicle, it becomes increasingly more and more expensive to keep that on the road.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they just basically tax them out of the system.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Okay. And can I ask, like, you've been operating since 2019. Do you have an estimate or any like raw figures on how many vehicles you've actually sold on in Australia now?
Yeah, it's just over 500 now. So we did 200 last year, and this investment from Boundless allows for tenfold growth.
Wow.
So we'll, be able to bump that up to about 2,000 vehicles for this next financial year.
That's incredible. Can I ask about that news as well? Because that is obviously quite huge for you guys, right?
Oh, it's awesome, and it's a good first step. So I think the most important thing is that finally, we're not just these crazy guys talking about this is what we should be. There's faith, and it's coming from, from Boundless Earth and from Cameron Adams, who's one of the founders of Canva. So having like two of the most successful tech companies in Australia, both, get behind and support what we're doing is pretty damn cool.
Yeah, amazing.
And it's a good market signal to other companies as well, or just that there is a future in doing this, and especially with our business model, because we're not predicated on making lots of money. We're trying to deliver social and environmental impact. It's really cool to see that there's still investor appetite for supporting social enterprises as well, so you can do good and not have to make money hand over fist, and working towards this goal where we can try and bake sustainability into business. And it's really nice that we now have a political framework which is starting to be supportive of this. There's still a lot of work to do, but we're in a much better position than we were last year for the 9 years before that.
Yeah.
We just had total policy and market failure. But now I think we've almost got all the right pieces in place to see a massive transformation for a cleaner energy and transport future. Getting there, getting closer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're doing brilliant work, and thank you so much for joining us today on the Green Canary.
No worries at all.
So, Elfie, I have to say that was a brilliant interview, and I have to say that for two reasons. One, you always say my interviews are brilliant, even when I might have an odd mediocre one thrown there into the mix, but I actually mean it. And it was brilliant on a couple of levels. I love that these guys aren't used car salesmen, I mean, you basically interviewed some used car salesmen. They're not. They're not. They're environmental scientists trying to make a difference. They've got some financial backing. And I love the bit about how they're actually researching the vehicles. They're actually saying, hey, are these cars actually any good? They're not just getting them and doing good in the world. They hope, fingers crossed, have we bought, thousands of vehicles that are sort of going to explode after 2 weeks? No, they've done their proper due diligence. And I love that they've even got roadside assist with the NRMA or whatever the equivalent helping body, because they've got a different name in each state.
Oh, so, I didn't realize that. Huh,
yeah,
there you go.
In Victoria, it's the RACV, and it's it's a different name in every state, but you know, those people that you join for a year who rock up and help you when you break down, well, hopefully that won't happen, because it sounds like these cars won't break down. So they've done their sort of research, and they're doing good, and they're doing good in a good way. Good for them.
Yes. Absolutely good for them. And I thought that was so interesting what he had to say about the way the Japanese electric vehicle market was working, and how there was already a churn there, which I think is so strange to think about, because in Australia, we've barely even seen electric vehicles. Like, you see the odd Tesla around, but we just don't see electric vehicles as regularly. Other markets, they're onto their second and third and fourth generation already.
Yeah, you see
Very odd.
you see a charging station somewhere, and you're like, ooh, you know, it's just absolutely exciting, and you know, it should just be standard. So well done them. And I really, really excited from a personal point of view, because we want to get one, and this might be the way in, because I ain't spending 50 grand on a car, but I could upgrade to the tune of about 20. So
yeah. Okay. All right. Well, there you go, Anthony. If you're listening, Ant is interested. I'll give you his number. All right. And now let's move into the mulch. These are the tiny news clippings for the week, the little curiosities that we enjoy. Ant, do you want to tell me about worms?
So, Elfie, it seems that researchers have found a way that worm spit, and there's your next death metal band right there, worm spit. Researchers have found that worm spit can break down plastics. This might be a solution to all that plastic waste out there. So the spit in question comes from wax worms, which actually are kind of moth larvae. Anyway, they break. Yeah, the spit has enzymes, and it breaks down polyethylene, which is one of the most widely used plastics in the world. I think it's the most widely used. Does it within a few hours at room temperature. What this opens up is the possibility that plastics could be reconstituted from broken down materials. Now, I don't know if you want to drink your next bottle of Coke out of a worm spit, broken down, reconstituted plastic bottle, but I do. I'm not grossed out by worm spit. I'm thrilled by it.
Now that you've said it so many times, it actually is making me feel sick, but it's okay. Anyway, one part of this story that I really want to say as well is the way that this was discovered, because it's so funny to me. But basically, there was a Spanish researcher who noticed they were clearing waxworms out of their beehive, because waxworms are this sort of like worm that invades beehives. So he was, cleaning up the little hive and putting these worms into a plastic bag. And then he noticed that the worms were not only eating through the plastic bag, there was some sort of chemical reaction happening that was breaking down the bag faster than he would have anticipated. So that is how they figured it out. And they think that, even in the future, there could be the possibility of giving everybody a waxworm kit, having a little box of your waxworms to, break down your household plastics.
Well,
we're far from it, but it's a possibility.
I feel like we're living in one of those board games. I forget what it's called, but there's one where you have to tell the truth, or you have to tell a lie or the truth, and the other players have to go, nah, that's not real, or yeah, that's real. Worm spit breaks down plastics. I'm going, nah, that's not real, but it is. So there you go. I lost the board game. All right, next. Farmed fish, and here it comes. Yes, they do feel pain, don't they, Elfie?
Yes. So there are going to be new welfare rules introduced for farmed fish in Britain after one of the leading organizations that has oversight over that industry accepted that fish can feel pain, stress, and anxiety. So this is very interesting. I started looking into it. There are like welfare standards for certain types of fish. So basically at the moment, most wild fish, there aren't any welfare standards for. So you can kill wild fish by leaving them out to asphyxiate, or like they're gutted while they're still alive. It's pretty rough to think about. But then there are certain certifications around farmed fish that mean that they have to be stunned before they're killed. And those sort of regulations have come alongside new research that says that these animals actually do feel a lot of stress and pain. And yeah, it's just interesting to see how these standards are changing. I didn't know this, but there's RSPCA labeled salmon in Australia, apparently. I don't think I've ever seen this in the supermarket, but I would love to know if anybody else has. And those are fish that have to be stunned before they're killed.
All I'd say on the salmon in Australia issue is read Richard Flanagan's Toxic.
True.
It'll change your life. I haven't eaten Tasmanian salmon since, and yeah, this whole issue makes me kind of go off seafood. But look, I think it's good that fish, the whole issue of fish welfare is being brought in the animal welfare debate. It's sort of been forgotten. And I reckon the whole fish don't feel pain thing has been fish lobby propaganda put forward for years by Big Fish Incorporated. So
Big Fish just makes me think of a very large tuna who might might be the CEO of a company now.
This massive tuna just sitting there smoking a cigar, just behind a desk surrounded by
a bastard.
Henchman, other tuna. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, look, I like that debate and I like where it's heading. Now, really quickly, a couple more quick ones. Extinction Rebellion protesters have done something very interesting in Melbourne, haven't they? They've glued themselves to a Picasso painting. There must be some sort of Picasso travelling exhibit in Melbourne. There is at the National Gallery of Victoria. And they glued themselves to the painting Massacre in Korea, which is a painting that depicts the horrors of war. And it was a climate thing. They unfurled a bit of a banner. They were trying to talk about how climate breakdown will lead to an increase in conflict around the world, which it will. The resources wars are coming on a scale, sadly, that we haven't seen before, I feel. So, the water wars especially, but the resources wars with climate breakdown. It was a very interesting protest. It didn't stop Sydney Harbour traffic as the other protests that we've talked so much about did recently. So in a sense, it was more publicly friendly, but I don't know, there might be some who say you can't desecrate art in the name of activism. What do you think?
Well, I will say that they didn't glue their hands to the painting itself. They glued their hands to like the plastic cover on the painting. So I'll forgive them that. And I also think, honestly, like if I was going to the gallery to see an exhibition, I'd be like 6 out of 10 excited. If I went to the gallery and saw climate protesters glued to one of the paintings, I'd be like 10 out of 10 excited. So I don't mind any of this. And I think good on you, Extinction Rebellion, for continuing to bring attention to these things.
So, Picasso was famous for his abstract art, but you reckon there was nothing abstract about what they did. They made a clear message. And I mean, I think, as you say, the painting wasn't damaged, so it wasn't bad. Now, I'll tell you something that's getting damaged, Elfie, and that is the last segue to the last segment of our show today. Kosciuszko National Park is being damaged. Now, that is my happy place. That is sort of my sweet spot on environmental issues, and it is very much my sour spot when I hear that the park's being trashed again. Like, there are so many ways to trash the largest national park in New South Wales. You can let tens of thousands of brumbies run free and destroy all the fragile little vegetation and animal habitat. You can expand ski resorts and the facilities around them. There's a thing called the Snowy Activation Precinct before the New South Wales government. That was a classic John Barilaro brain fart, it must be said. And they're trying to just supercharge some of the infrastructure there in a really bad way. But Snowy 2.0, this is a tougher one, Alfie, because Snowy 2.0 is a renewable energy project. For those who don't understand it, in 25 words or less, they're using existing dams. That's good. There's 2 dams in particular. And what they're going to do is pump up water from the lower one to the higher one, then run it over when there's peak demand. So they've got water cascading down, generating hydropower. It's not a bad idea on paper, but in reality, transmission lines across the park, huge holes that they've created for more tunnels. Now, some of the people blew up there. You've got them in the notes here, Elfie, don't you? What did it was Ted Woodley, who I vaguely know. He's with the National Parks Association of New South Wales. Oh, he said it's like putting in a transmission line over the Opera House, which I think is beautifully said.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, to be clear, it is also quite a dishonest thing what has happened as well. Like, the New South Wales government amended legislation around Snowy 2.0. In the 2006 plan, it originally required all transmission lines in the park to be located underground. And then there was just this amendment that just got like popped in. Who knew? And it says everything except those constructed as part of Snowy 2.0. So
I didn't actually know that. I was wondering because I knew there was no new transmission lines in the park. I couldn't understand how that could happen, but the New South Wales government amendment is just appalling that this can happen. I mean, it should be a World Heritage landscape, Elfie, but it can't be. To qualify for World Heritage status, you need to have a certain amount of land that is unaffected by any sort of human activity. Kosciuszko doesn't even closely qualify for that anymore, and this is just another reason why.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, we'll keep you updated on that story, I'm sure, because Ant loves Kosciuszko and he loves talking about that environment. And yeah, we'll talk about it more in the weeks to come. But for the moment, that is all we have time for on today's episode. This has been a long one, I think, Ant. I think we've been talking for a while, but that's okay. They've been good stories. Anyway, before we head off today, we would like to acknowledge, as always, the traditional custodians of the land on which we're recording, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We'd like to pay our respect to elders past and present and acknowledge that this land was stolen, never ceded.
Thanks, Elfie. And maybe I should go in that sort of political campaign voice where they go, this was brought to you by so-and-so of this place. Just to round it out really quickly. But please subscribe to our newsletter. About 17 people did last week. Blew me away. Very good.
Awesome.
Hello at thegreencanary.co. for Australia's chirpiest newsletter, as we like to say. I like to keep it upbeat, but informative. Every Wednesday it comes out. You are not a Canaria unless you're podding and newslettering with us. Also, don't forget to hang out with us on socials. We are at Green Canary Pod on Twitter. Thank you to all our new followers this week, edging towards 1,000, which is great. And Elfie, you are killing it on Instagram. You have grown our audience there, and there's lots of action there. So please get around us at Green Canary Media on Instagram. And boy, oh boy, I think we better leave it there till next week. Thanks so much for joining us. Good on you, Elfie. Good on you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
All right. Bye.
Bye.